Charles walked through the grand halls of their country home, his footsteps echoing against the marble floors. The mansion had been in his family for generations, but lately, something felt different about the place. He couldn't shake the feeling that Camilla was hiding something from him. It started 3 weeks ago when he noticed small changes in her behavior. Camilla would disappear for hours at a time, claiming she was reading in the library or tending to her garden. But when Charles looked for her in those places, she was nowhere to be found. When he asked the staff, they would give him confused looks and say they hadn't seen her either. The first time he noticed something was wrong was on a Tuesday morning. Charles had been looking for Camilla to discuss their upcoming charity event. He checked her usual spots: the morning room where she liked to have her tea, the conservatory where she spent time with her plants, and the small sitting room where she often wrote letters. She wasn't in any of these places. He asked Mrs. Henderson, their longtime housekeeper, if she had seen Camilla that morning. Mrs. Henderson looked puzzled and said she had served breakfast to Camilla in her room at 8 o'clock, but hadn't seen her since. Charles found this strange because Camilla never stayed in her room past 9 in the morning. As the days passed, Charles began to pay more attention to Camilla's movements. He noticed that she would often excuse herself after lunch, saying she needed to rest or had correspondence to attend to. But when he walked past her study an hour later, the room would be empty and dark. One evening, Charles decided to ask Camilla directly about her whereabouts. They were sitting in the drawing room after dinner, and she was reading a book about gardening. The fire was crackling softly in the fireplace, and everything seemed peaceful and normal. "Darling," Charles said, setting down his newspaper, "I've been wondering where you've been spending your afternoons lately. I've looked for you several times, but you seem to have disappeared." Camilla looked up from her book with a smile that seemed forced. "Oh, you know how it is," she said with a light laugh. "I've been exploring different parts of the house. This place is so large, there are still rooms I haven't properly seen in ages." Charles nodded, but something about her answer didn't sit right with him. He had lived in this house for most of his life, and he knew every room, every corridor, every hidden corner. There weren't any parts of the house that Camilla hadn't seen before. The next day, Charles decided to follow Camilla discreetly. After lunch, she excused herself as usual, saying she wanted to read in a quiet spot. Charles waited 5 minutes, then quietly followed the direction she had gone. He walked through the main corridor, past the library and the music room, but there was no sign of her. He checked the library thoroughly, looking behind the tall bookshelves and in the reading alcoves. The room was empty and silent. He went to the music room, thinking perhaps she had decided to play the piano, but that room was also empty. Charles began to feel frustrated and confused. He spent the next hour searching through different rooms on the ground floor, then moved to the second floor. He checked guest bedrooms, the small parlors, and even the old nursery that hadn't been used in years. There was no trace of Camilla anywhere. That evening, when Camilla returned for dinner, she seemed relaxed and cheerful. She talked about a book she had been reading and mentioned how peaceful her afternoon had been. Charles listened carefully, trying to detect any hints about where she had actually been, but her conversation gave nothing away. Over the next few days, Charles became more observant. He started noting the exact times when Camilla would disappear and when she would return. He noticed that she was usually gone for about 2 to 3 hours in the afternoons. He also noticed that she would sometimes come back with small traces of dust on her clothing, as if she had been in an unused room or attic space. One afternoon, Charles decided to be more systematic in his search. Instead of randomly looking for Camilla, he would map out her possible routes through the house. He started from the dining room where they usually had lunch and tried to think of all the possible directions she could have gone. He followed the main corridor toward the east wing of the house, an area that was less frequently used. This wing contained several guest rooms, a small library, and some storage rooms. Charles walked slowly, listening for any sounds that might indicate Camilla's presence. As he walked through this section of the house, Charles noticed something he had overlooked before. At the end of the east corridor, there was a door that he couldn't immediately remember the purpose of. He had grown up in this house, but there were so many rooms that some of the less important ones had faded from his daily awareness. Charles approached the door and tried the handle. It was locked. This surprised him because most of the interior doors in the house were never locked. The family had always felt safe in their own home, and locking doors was usually unnecessary. He examined the door more closely. It was made of dark oak, similar to the other doors in the house. But this one seemed somehow different. The wood looked like it had been recently cleaned and polished, unlike some of the other doors in this less used wing of the house. Charles tried to remember what this room had been used for in the past. When he was a child, he recalled it being some kind of storage space for old furniture and family items that weren't needed regularly. He hadn't thought about this room in years, and he certainly couldn't remember why it would be locked now. That evening, Charles decided to ask the staff about the locked room. He found Mrs. Henderson in the kitchen after dinner and casually brought up the subject. "Mrs. Henderson," he said, "I was walking through the east wing today and noticed a locked door at the end of the corridor. Do you know what that room is used for now?" Mrs. Henderson looked thoughtful for a moment. "Oh, that room," she said. "Her ladyship asked us not to clean in there anymore about a month ago. She said she wanted to organize some personal items herself and needed privacy to do it properly." This information made Charles even more curious. Camilla had never mentioned wanting to organize anything in that particular room. And why would she need privacy from the household staff? They had always been trusted with every aspect of the family's daily life. "Did she say anything else about it?" Charles asked, trying to keep his tone casual. "Not really," Mrs. Henderson replied. "She just said it was a personal project and asked us to respect her privacy. She even asked for the key to be given to her instead of keeping it with the other household keys." Charles thanked Mrs. Henderson and left the kitchen with his mind racing. Now he knew where Camilla was spending her mysterious afternoon hours, but he still didn't know why. What kind of personal project would require such secrecy? And why hadn't she mentioned it to him? The next few days were torture for Charles. Every time Camilla disappeared to her secret room, he found himself pacing around the house, wondering what she was doing in there. He considered asking her directly, but something held him back. If Camilla had wanted him to know about her project, she would have told him. The fact that she was keeping it secret made him worry that it was something she didn't want him to see. Charles began to notice other small changes in Camilla's behavior. She seemed more distracted during their conversations, as if her mind was elsewhere. Sometimes he would catch her staring into space with a thoughtful expression, and when he asked what she was thinking about, she would give vague answers about household matters or upcoming social events. One evening, Charles was reading in his study when he heard footsteps in the corridor outside. He glanced at the clock and saw that it was nearly 11 o'clock. Camilla had gone to bed an hour earlier, so the footsteps surprised him. He quietly opened his study door and peered into the corridor. In the dim light, he could see a figure walking toward the east wing of the house. The person was carrying what looked like a small lamp or candle. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, Charles realized it was Camilla. She was walking quietly and carefully, clearly trying not to wake anyone. Charles watched as she disappeared around the corner toward the east wing. He waited a few minutes, then decided to follow her. Moving as quietly as possible, Charles made his way through the dark corridors toward the east wing. When he reached the corner where he had last seen Camilla, he stopped and listened. He could hear very faint sounds coming from the direction of the locked room, soft footsteps, and what sounded like furniture being moved. Charles crept closer to the door. There was a thin line of light visible underneath it, confirming that Camilla was indeed inside. He pressed his ear to the door, trying to hear what she was doing, but the sounds were too muffled to make out clearly. He stood there for several minutes, feeling like a spy in his own home. Part of him felt guilty for following Camilla and listening at the door, but his curiosity and growing concern outweighed his guilt. What could she possibly be doing in there at such a late hour? After about 20 minutes, the sounds from inside the room stopped. Charles quickly but quietly made his way back to his study, not wanting to be caught eavesdropping. A few minutes later, he heard Camilla's footsteps in the corridor as she returned to their bedroom. The next morning at breakfast, Camilla seemed tired but cheerful. She mentioned that she hadn't slept very well and joked about getting older and having trouble sleeping through the night. Charles nodded sympathetically, but he knew the real reason she was tired. As the days went by, Charles found himself thinking about the locked room constantly. He tried to focus on his daily responsibilities, his correspondence, meetings with estate managers, and various social obligations. But his mind kept wandering back to Camilla's secret project. He began to pay attention to when Camilla had the key to the room. Sometimes he would see her slip it into her pocket after breakfast, and other times she seemed to keep it with her throughout the day. Charles realized that she must have developed a routine around her visits to the room. One afternoon, Charles was walking past Camilla's dressing room when he noticed her jewelry box was open on the vanity table. This wasn't unusual, but something caught his eye. Nestled among her necklaces and earrings was a small, old-fashioned key that he didn't recognize. Charles looked around to make sure Camilla wasn't nearby, then approached the jewelry box for a closer look. The key was made of dark metal and had an ornate design that matched the style of the older locks in the house. Charles was almost certain this was the key to the mysterious room. He stood there staring at the key, feeling torn between his desire to know the truth and his respect for Camilla's privacy. If he took the key and explored the room while she was out, he would finally have answers to his questions. But it would also be a serious violation of her trust. Charles thought about their relationship and how it had always been built on openness and honesty. They had shared everything with each other for so many years. The fact that Camilla was now keeping such a significant secret from him was deeply troubling. As he stood there debating what to do, Charles heard Camilla's voice in the corridor outside. She was talking to one of the maids about arrangements for their dinner party next week. Charles quickly stepped away from the jewelry box and pretended to be looking for something in the nearby bookshelf. Camilla entered the dressing room a moment later and smiled when she saw him. "Looking for something, darling?" she asked. "Just a book I thought I left in here," Charles replied, feeling guilty about his lie. Camilla moved to her vanity table and began to close her jewelry box. Charles watched as she picked up the mysterious key and slipped it into her pocket. Their eyes met in the mirror, and for a moment, Charles thought he saw a flicker of something, guilt, perhaps, or concern, in her expression. But it passed so quickly that he couldn't be sure. That evening, Charles made a decision. He couldn't continue living with these questions and doubts. If Camilla wouldn't tell him about her secret room voluntarily, he would have to find another way to discover the truth. The next time she left the key unattended, he would use it to explore the room himself. The opportunity came sooner than he expected. 2 days later, Charles got his chance. Camilla received an urgent telephone call from her sister, who needed help with a family matter in London. She would have to leave immediately and stay overnight. Charles offered to come with her, but Camilla insisted it was a private family issue, and she could handle it alone. As Camilla packed her overnight bag, Charles watched her carefully. She seemed distracted and worried about her sister's problem, and Charles noticed she forgot to take the mysterious key from her jewelry box. After she left for the train station, Charles waited an hour to make sure she wouldn't return for anything she had forgotten. His heart was beating fast as he went to Camilla's dressing room. The key was exactly where he had seen it before, nestled among her jewelry. Charles picked it up with trembling fingers. The metal felt cold and heavy in his hand. He stared at it for a long moment, knowing that once he used this key, there would be no going back. Charles made his way through the house to the east wing. The corridor seemed longer than usual, and his footsteps echoed loudly in the silence. When he reached the locked door, he stopped and took a deep breath. Part of him wanted to turn around and pretend he had never found the key, but his need to know the truth was stronger than his fear. He inserted the key into the lock and turned it slowly. The mechanism clicked, and the door opened with a soft creak. Charles stood in the doorway for a moment, surprised by what he saw. The room was not at all what he had expected. Instead of the dusty storage space he remembered from his childhood, the room had been completely transformed. The walls were covered with rich, dark wallpaper that Charles had never seen before. Heavy curtains blocked most of the natural light from the windows, and several lamps provided a warm, intimate glow. Charles stepped inside and closed the door behind him. The room was furnished like a private sitting room, but unlike any other room in their house. There was an elegant writing desk positioned near one of the windows, with papers neatly organized in small piles. A comfortable armchair sat nearby, with a small side table that held a teacup and saucer. But what caught Charles's attention most were the walls. They were covered with photographs, letters, and documents that he had never seen before. As he moved closer to examine them, his confusion grew. Many of the photographs showed Camilla, but not the Camilla he knew. These pictures showed a younger woman dressed in clothes from decades past. Charles picked up one of the photographs for a closer look. It showed Camilla standing beside a man Charles didn't recognize. They were both smiling, and the man's arm was around Camilla's waist in a way that suggested intimacy. Charles turned the photograph over and found a date written in Camilla's handwriting, April 1973. This confused Charles even more. He and Camilla hadn't met until 1975, and she had never mentioned having a serious relationship before they met. He had always assumed he was her first love, just as she was his, but this photograph clearly showed Camilla with another man, and they looked very happy together. Charles set the photograph down and examined the others on the wall. There were dozens of them, all featuring Camilla with the same mysterious man. Some showed them at what appeared to be formal events, others captured casual moments like walks in the countryside or meals at restaurants. In every picture, they looked comfortable and in love. Moving to another section of the wall, Charles found letters written in Camilla's hand. The handwriting was younger and less refined than her current style, but it was definitely hers. Charles hesitated before reading them, knowing he was invading Camilla's privacy, but his need to understand what was happening was too strong to resist. The first letter he read was addressed to "My dearest Andrew." It was dated June 1973 and was filled with expressions of love and longing. Camilla wrote about missing Andrew while he was away on business, and about her excitement for his return. She described their future plans together and mentioned how much she loved their secret hideaway. Charles felt his stomach drop as he read the letter. Secret hideaway? Was this room the place Camilla had shared with another man before she met Charles? The thought made him feel sick and confused. Why had she never mentioned Andrew? And why was she spending time in this room now, so many years later? He read several more letters, each one deepening his confusion and hurt. The letters painted a picture of a passionate and serious relationship between Camilla and Andrew. They wrote about their dreams of marriage, of traveling together, and of building a life as a couple. Some letters mentioned obstacles they were facing, family disapproval, and social expectations that were keeping them apart. Charles moved to the writing desk and saw that it was covered with more recent papers. There were what appeared to be drafts of letters, all addressed to Andrew. Charles picked up one of them and began to read. This letter was in Camilla's current handwriting, and it was dated just 2 weeks ago. "My dear Andrew," the letter began, "I hope this finds you well and happy. I know it has been many years since we last spoke, but I find myself thinking of you more and more lately. I have been spending time in our old room, the one I told you about in my last letter. Being here brings back so many memories of our time together." Charles had to sit down as he continued reading. Camilla was writing to Andrew in the present tense, as if they were still in contact with each other. She mentioned our old room, as if Andrew knew about this secret space in Charles's family home. How was that possible? The letter went on to describe Camilla's current life, but in a way that shocked Charles. She wrote about feeling trapped in her marriage, about missing the passion and excitement she had shared with Andrew. She mentioned Charles, but only to complain about how predictable and boring their life together had become. "Charles is a good man," she wrote, "but he has never understood me the way you did. Sometimes I feel like I am living someone else's life, playing a role that doesn't fit who I really am. When I'm in this room, surrounded by memories of us, I feel like myself again." Charles felt as if the ground was shifting beneath him. The woman described in this letter was not the Camilla he thought he knew. His wife had always seemed content with their life together. She had never given him any indication that she felt trapped or unhappy. To read these thoughts in her own handwriting was devastating. He continued reading and found even more disturbing revelations. Camilla wrote about meeting Andrew for coffee in London several months ago. She described how wonderful it had been to see him again, and how easily they had fallen back into their old, comfortable intimacy. She mentioned plans to meet him again soon. Charles set the letter down with shaking hands. His wife was not only keeping a secret room filled with memories of another man, but she was also meeting with this man behind Charles's back. The betrayal felt like a physical blow to his chest. He stood up and walked around the room, trying to process what he was learning. On another wall, he found newspaper clippings and magazine articles. Most of them featured photographs of social events and parties from the 1970s. Charles saw pictures of himself and Camilla at various functions, but he also noticed that Andrew appeared in many of these same photographs. Looking more closely, Charles realized that Andrew had been part of their social circle all along. How had Charles never noticed him before? Or had he simply forgotten about him over the years? Charles tried to remember the social events from their early years together, but the faces of individual people had blurred together in his memory. In one newspaper clipping, Charles found an engagement announcement from 1974. It was for Camilla and Andrew. Charles stared at the announcement in shock. Camilla had been engaged to another man just 1 year before she met Charles, and she had never mentioned this to him. The announcement described Andrew as a successful businessman from a good family. It mentioned the upcoming wedding and included quotes from both families expressing their happiness about the union. Charles searched through the other papers, looking for any mention of what had happened to this engagement, but he couldn't find anything. As he continued exploring the room, Charles found a small wooden box on one of the shelves. Inside were more personal items: a dried flower, what appeared to be ticket stubs from theater performances, and a small piece of jewelry that Charles had never seen Camilla wear. At the bottom of the box was a bundle of letters tied with a ribbon. These letters were from Andrew to Camilla, written during the same time period as the letters Charles had already read. Andrew's handwriting was strong and confident, and his words revealed the same deep love and passion that Camilla had expressed in her letters to him. In one letter, Andrew wrote about his frustration with the obstacles keeping them apart. He mentioned family pressure and social expectations, but he also wrote about his determination to find a way for them to be together. "I don't care what anyone says," he wrote. "You are the love of my life, and I will not give up on us." But in later letters, Andrew's tone became more resigned. He wrote about accepting that their families would never approve of their relationship. He mentioned pressures to marry someone more suitable and his struggle to decide what was right. The final letter in the bundle was heartbreaking to read. "My darling Camilla," Andrew wrote, "this is the hardest letter I have ever had to write. I have been offered a position in America that would require me to leave England for at least 5 years. My family thinks this is the perfect opportunity for me to start fresh and forget about us. I know that if I stay, we will continue to fight a battle that we cannot win. Perhaps it is better for both of us if I go." The letter continued with Andrew's promises to always love Camilla, but his acceptance that they could not be together. He encouraged her to find happiness with someone else, someone who could give her the life she deserved without the complications that surrounded their relationship. Charles sat in the armchair and tried to piece together the timeline of events. It seemed that Camilla and Andrew had been deeply in love, but had been forced apart by circumstances beyond their control. Shortly after Andrew left for America, Camilla had met Charles. Had she married him on the rebound from her lost love? Had she ever truly loved Charles the way she had loved Andrew? These questions tormented Charles as he continued to explore the room. He found more evidence of Camilla's ongoing connection to Andrew. There were recent letters from him, describing his life in America, his successful business, and his eventual marriage to someone else. But even in these letters, Andrew expressed his continuing love for Camilla and his regret about their separation. In her replies to these recent letters, Camilla had been equally honest about her feelings. She wrote about the life she might have had if things had been different. She described Charles as a kind husband, but admitted that she had never felt the same passion for him that she had felt for Andrew. "I often wonder what would have happened if you had stayed," she wrote in one letter. "Would we have found a way to be together despite everything? I know it's pointless to think about such things, but I can't help myself. This room has become my sanctuary, the only place where I can be honest about my feelings." Charles found a calendar on the desk with various dates marked in red ink. Looking more closely, he realized these were the dates when Camilla had been meeting with Andrew during his visits to London. There had been more meetings than Charles had realized from reading the letters. They had been seeing each other regularly for several months. The betrayal Charles felt was overwhelming, but it was complicated by sadness and understanding. He was beginning to see that Camilla had been carrying the pain of lost love for their entire marriage. She had tried to be a good wife to him, but she had never been able to completely let go of her first love. Charles found a diary that Camilla had been keeping in the room. The entries revealed the depth of her internal struggle. She wrote about her guilt over her feelings for Andrew, her attempts to be content with her marriage to Charles, and her confusion about what was right and wrong. "I know I should be happy with the life I have," she wrote in one entry. "Charles is everything a woman could want in a husband. He is kind, generous, and devoted to me. But my heart belongs to someone else, and it always has. I feel like I am living a lie, pretending to be satisfied when I am not." In another entry, she wrote about the guilt she felt over meeting with Andrew. "I know it's wrong to see him behind Charles's back, but I can't seem to stop myself. When I'm with Andrew, I feel alive in a way that I never do otherwise. Is it fair to Charles that I can never give him the love he deserves? Is it fair to myself to deny the love I feel for Andrew?" Charles closed the diary and sat back in the chair, feeling emotionally exhausted. The room around him suddenly felt oppressive and heavy with secrets. He understood now why Camilla had been spending so much time here. This was the only place where she could be honest about her feelings and connect with the love she had lost. But understanding didn't make the betrayal hurt any less. Charles felt as if his entire marriage had been built on a foundation of lies. Not malicious lies, perhaps, but lies nonetheless. Camilla had never been completely his, and now he knew that she never would be. As Charles prepared to leave the room, he noticed one final item on the desk. It was a letter that Camilla appeared to be in the process of writing. The date at the top was yesterday, and only the first few lines were completed. "My dearest Andrew," it began, "I have been thinking about our conversation last week, and I believe you may be right. Perhaps it is time for us to stop pretending that we can be satisfied with stolen moments and secret meetings. Life is too short to live without true love." Charles didn't read any further. He understood what Camilla was considering, and the knowledge felt like a knife in his heart. She was thinking about leaving him for Andrew. After all these years, she was ready to choose the love she had always wanted over the comfortable life she had built with Charles. He carefully returned everything to its original position in the room, locked the door, and made his way back to Camilla's dressing room to replace the key. As he walked through the familiar halls of his family home, everything looked different to him now. The life he had thought was so solid and secure was actually built on shifting sand. Charles spent the rest of the day in his study, unable to concentrate on anything. Every few minutes, his mind would return to what he had discovered in the secret room. The images of Camilla with Andrew, the love letters, and most painful of all, her recent correspondence that revealed her ongoing feelings, played repeatedly in his thoughts. When Camilla returned from London the next evening, Charles tried to act normally. She seemed tired from her journey and concerned about her sister's situation. Over dinner, she told him about the family problems she had been helping to resolve, and Charles listened politely, but he found it difficult to focus on her words. Every time he looked at her, he saw the woman who had been writing love letters to another man. "You seem quiet tonight, darling," Camilla observed as they finished their meal. "Is everything all right?" Charles forced a smile. "Just thinking about some estate matters. Nothing important." Camilla nodded and reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "You work too hard sometimes. Perhaps we should plan a holiday soon, just the two of us." The irony of her suggestion was not lost on Charles. She was talking about spending time alone with him while secretly planning to leave him for another man. He managed to agree that a holiday might be nice, but inside, he felt hollow and deceived. That night, Charles lay awake in bed while Camilla slept beside him. He listened to her quiet breathing and wondered how long she had been living this double life. Had she been thinking about Andrew during their conversations, their meals together, even their intimate moments? The thought made Charles feel sick. Over the next few days, Charles found himself watching Camilla with new eyes. Every time she excused herself or seemed distracted, he wondered if she was thinking about Andrew or planning another secret meeting. When she received phone calls, he wondered if Andrew might be on the other end of the line. Charles also found himself analyzing their entire relationship, looking for signs that he had missed over the years. Had Camilla ever truly been happy with him? He remembered their wedding day and tried to recall her expression. Had there been sadness behind her smile that he had been too young and naive to notice? He thought about their early years together, when they had been building their life as a couple. Camilla had always seemed content, but now Charles wondered if her contentment had been an act. Had she been comparing him to Andrew all along? Had she been settling for a comfortable life instead of pursuing the love she really wanted? The knowledge was eating away at Charles, but he didn't know what to do with it. He couldn't confront Camilla without admitting that he had invaded her privacy by entering the secret room. But he also couldn't continue pretending that nothing had changed when everything felt different to him now. Charles began to notice things about Camilla that he had never paid attention to before. Sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, her expression would become wistful and sad. Other times, when she was writing letters or reading, she would pause and stare into space as if lost in memories. One morning, Charles saw Camilla checking the mail with unusual eagerness. When she found a particular letter, her face lit up in a way that Charles hadn't seen in years. She quickly tucked the letter into her pocket and continued sorting through the rest of the mail as if nothing had happened. but Charles was certain the letter was from Andrew. That afternoon, Camilla disappeared to her secret room as usual. Charles knew she was probably reading Andrew's letter and perhaps writing a reply. The thought of her happiness over another man's correspondence filled Charles with a mixture of pain and anger. After a week of this torture, Charles decided he needed to talk to someone about what he had discovered. He couldn't discuss it with any of their mutual friends, and he didn't want to involve family members. Finally, he decided to visit his old friend Robert, who lived about an hour's drive away. Robert and Charles had known each other since university, and Robert was one of the few people Charles trusted completely. Over the years, Robert had always been honest with Charles, even when the truth was difficult to hear. Charles drove to Robert's house on a gray, rainy afternoon that matched his mood. When Robert saw Charles's expression, he immediately invited him in and poured them both a drink. "You look terrible," Robert said bluntly. "What's wrong?" Charles told Robert everything he had discovered, from Camilla's mysterious disappearances to the secret room full of letters and photographs. Robert listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious as the story unfolded. When Charles finished, Robert was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. "I'm sorry, Charles. This must be incredibly painful for you." "I don't know what to do," Charles admitted. "Part of me wants to confront her, but part of me is afraid of what she might say. What if she confirms that she's never loved me the way she loved him? What if she tells me she's planning to leave?" Robert considered this carefully. "Do you want to save your marriage?" he asked. "I don't know," Charles replied honestly. "How can I stay married to someone who's in love with someone else? But how can I leave when she's never actually done anything wrong? Loving someone else isn't a crime, even if it hurts." "But meeting with Andrew behind your back is wrong," Robert pointed out. "And keeping this secret room is a form of betrayal, even if it's not a physical affair." Charles knew Robert was right, but the situation felt more complicated than that. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if I had never found that room," he said. "Would I have been happy continuing to live in ignorance? Was our marriage really so bad before I knew the truth?" Robert looked at his friend with sympathy. "But now you do know the truth. The question is what you're going to do with that knowledge." After talking with Robert, Charles felt slightly clearer about his options, but no less conflicted about what to choose. He could confront Camilla and demand that she choose between him and Andrew. He could quietly gather evidence of her betrayal and file for divorce. Or he could continue to pretend ignorance and hope that Camilla would eventually choose to stay with him. None of these options felt satisfying to Charles. Each one seemed to lead to pain and loss in different ways. When Charles returned home that evening, he found Camilla in the drawing room, reading by the fire. She looked up when he entered and smiled warmly. "How was your visit with Robert?" she asked. "Fine," Charles replied, taking a seat across from her. "We talked about old times, mostly." Camilla nodded and returned to her book, but Charles continued to study her face in the firelight. She looked peaceful and content, with no trace of the guilt or conflict he might have expected to see. Either she was an accomplished actress, or she had found a way to compartmentalize her feelings that Charles couldn't understand. Over the next few days, Charles found himself observing Camilla's routines more carefully. He noticed that she seemed happiest when she returned from her secret room sessions. Her mood would be lighter, and she would be more affectionate toward him. It was as if spending time with her memories of Andrew recharged her enough to play the role of devoted wife. This realization was perhaps the most painful of all. Charles understood now that Camilla's kindness toward him was partly an act of compensation for her secret betrayal. She was trying to be a better wife to him because she felt guilty about her true feelings. One evening, Charles made a decision. Instead of continuing to suffer in silence, he would give Camilla an opportunity to be honest with him. He wouldn't reveal that he knew about the secret room, but he would ask her directly about her happiness in their marriage. They were having dinner together, and the conversation had lulled into comfortable silence. Charles set down his fork and looked at Camilla seriously. "Camilla," he said, "I want to ask you something, and I'd like you to be completely honest with me." She looked up from her plate with a slightly surprised expression. "Of course, darling. What is it?" "Are you happy?" Charles asked. "I mean, truly happy with our life together?" Camilla was quiet for a moment, and Charles could see her carefully considering her response. "What makes you ask such a question?" she said finally. "I've been feeling lately that something is different between us," Charles said. "You seem distracted sometimes, and I wonder if there's something you need that I'm not giving you." Camilla reached across the table and took his hand. "Charles, you have been a wonderful husband to me. I couldn't ask for anyone more kind or devoted." Charles noticed that she hadn't actually answered his question about being happy. "But are you fulfilled?" he pressed. "Do you ever feel like something is missing from your life?" For a moment, Charles thought Camilla might tell him the truth. Her expression became vulnerable, and he could see her struggling with her response. But then she squeezed his hand and smiled. "I think everyone feels that way sometimes," she said, "but I'm grateful for what we have. We're very fortunate, you know." Again, Charles noticed that she had avoided giving a direct answer. Her response was diplomatic and kind, but it wasn't honest. She was protecting both of them from a difficult conversation. "If you ever do feel like something is missing," Charles said carefully, "I hope you know you can talk to me about it." Camilla's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, Charles thought she might confess everything. Instead, she stood up and walked around the table to kiss his forehead. "You're very sweet to worry about me," she said. "But truly, I'm fine." That night, Charles lay in bed thinking about their conversation. Camilla had been given the perfect opportunity to open up about her feelings, but she had chosen to maintain her facade instead. Charles realized that she was probably trying to protect him from the truth, which in some ways made the betrayal even more painful. A few days later, Charles discovered that Camilla had made plans to go to London again. She mentioned it casually over breakfast, saying that she wanted to visit some shops and perhaps see a play. She would be gone for 2 days. Charles was certain that she was planning to meet Andrew, and the knowledge filled him with despair. He was watching his marriage dissolve before his eyes, and there seemed to be nothing he could do to stop it. On the first day of Camilla's trip, Charles couldn't concentrate on anything. He wandered around the house aimlessly, eventually finding himself standing outside the door to the secret room. He still had access to the key in Camilla's jewelry box, and he was tempted to enter the room again to see if there were any new developments. But Charles realized that learning more details about Camilla's betrayal would only increase his pain without changing anything. Instead, he decided to use this time to think about what he really wanted for his future. Did he want to fight for a marriage with someone who would always love another man more than him? Did he want to confront Camilla and force her to choose, knowing that she might choose Andrew? Or did he want to quietly step aside and allow her to pursue the happiness she had always wanted? Charles spent hours walking through the grounds of his estate, trying to imagine his life without Camilla. They had been together for so many years that he couldn't really picture himself alone. But he also couldn't imagine continuing to live with the knowledge of her true feelings. When Camilla returned from London, she seemed different. There was a glow about her that Charles hadn't seen in years, and she was more affectionate toward him than she had been in months. Charles realized that seeing Andrew had made her happy, and her guilt over that happiness was making her try harder to be a good wife. This pattern continued for several weeks. Camilla would meet with Andrew, return home glowing with happiness, and then shower Charles with attention and affection. Charles understood that she was trying to balance her guilt with kindness, but the situation was becoming unbearable for him. Finally, Charles made his decision. Instead of confronting Camilla about her betrayal, he would give her the gift of honesty. He would tell her that he knew she wasn't completely happy in their marriage, and he would give her permission to pursue whatever would make her truly fulfilled. It wasn't the ending Charles had ever imagined for their marriage, but he realized that loving someone sometimes meant letting them go. If Camilla could find the happiness with Andrew that she had never been able to find with Charles, then perhaps that was what should happen. Charles planned his conversation with Camilla carefully. He would tell her that he had sensed her unhappiness and that he wanted her to be honest about what she needed. He wouldn't reveal that he knew about Andrew or the secret room, but he would make it clear that he was prepared to accept whatever truth she wanted to share. The conversation would change everything between them. But Charles knew that the alternative was continuing to live a lie. And after weeks of watching Camilla struggle with her divided loyalties, Charles had come to believe that the truth, however painful, was better than the beautiful deception they had been maintaining for so many years. As Charles prepared for this conversation, he felt a mixture of sadness and relief. His marriage, as he had known it, was ending, but perhaps something more honest and authentic could take its place, even if it meant they would no longer be together.